Beneath the geysers, hot springs, and bubbling mud pots of Yellowstone National Park lies one of the largest volcanic systems on the planet, a vast reservoir of heat and partly molten rock that has, in the deep past, produced some of the greatest eruptions in the geologic history of North America. It is a place of quiet beauty on the surface and immense power below. And it naturally raises a question that fascinates and unsettles people in equal measure. If Yellowstone were ever to erupt again on a large scale, which places would be most at risk? And what would happen to them? This is the question we are going to explore, tracing the danger outward from the caldera to 5 cities that sit in the potential path of Yellowstone's fury. But before we go a single step further, we need to be honest and clear about something, because it matters enormously. Yellowstone is not overdue for an eruption. That idea, repeated endlessly online, is a myth, because the volcano does not erupt on a fixed schedule and cannot be said to be late for anything. Scientists who monitor Yellowstone constantly see no sign that a large eruption is coming in our lifetimes or any time in the foreseeable future, and the most likely activity, if any, would be far smaller than the great eruptions of the past. What follows, then, is not a prediction and not a warning of imminent catastrophe. It is a thoughtful exploration of a low probability, high consequence scenario, a way of understanding the geography of a risk that is real but remote, and of appreciating the extraordinary and powerful forces that sleep quietly beneath one of America's most beloved landscapes. Quick honest word before we go on. A lot of people watch these all the way through, love them, and forget the one small thing that keeps a channel like ours going, hitting subscribe. If you are finding this interesting, take 1 second and subscribe right now. It genuinely matters for us and costs you nothing. And drop your state or country in the comments so we can see who is here. All right, let's begin. Understanding what a Yellowstone eruption would actually do to understand which cities would be at risk. We first have to understand how a large Yellowstone eruption would threaten places far away, because the danger is not what most people imagine. Yellowstone is not the kind of volcano that would send rivers of lava pouring across the landscape toward distant cities. Lava flows, even in a great eruption, would stay largely within and near the park itself. The far-reaching threat from a major Yellowstone eruption, the one that could touch cities hundreds of miles away, is volcanic ash, the fine, gritty, glassy material that a huge eruption would blast high into the atmosphere and spread across the continent on the winds. This ash is the key to understanding the geography of the risk, because where it falls and how thickly depends above all on which way the wind is blowing when an eruption occurs. The prevailing winds across the United States generally blow from west to east, which means that in a large eruption, the heaviest ash would most likely be carried toward the east and the areas downwind of the park, while places upwind might receive far less. Volcanic ash is dangerous in many ways, and it is worth understanding exactly why, because it is not like the soft ash of a wood fire, but a fine powder of pulverized rock and volcanic glass. Gritty and abrasive and surprisingly heavy. It can collapse roofs under its weight when it accumulates, especially if it becomes wet and heavy. And this is one of the deadliest hazards it poses to buildings and the people inside them. It can foul the air and make breathing hazardous, irritating the lungs and eyes and endangering those with respiratory conditions. It can clog machinery and engines, ground aircraft across enormous regions, contaminate water supplies, smother and damage crops and farmland, short out electrical systems, and bring the ordinary functioning of a city grinding to a halt. Cleaning it up after a major fall is an immense undertaking because the ash is heavy and does not simply wash away, and it can linger and be stirred up again by wind and traffic for a long time afterward. The cities most at risk from Yellowstone are therefore those close enough and, crucially, downwind enough to receive significant ashfall, and it is with this understanding that we can look at 5 cities that sit in the potential path. Keep in mind as we go that the exact pattern of ashfall in any real eruption would depend entirely on the winds at the time, so that the risk to each city is a matter of possibility and position rather than certainty, a picture of where the danger could fall rather than where it definitely would. The giant beneath the park to grasp why these cities appear on such a list at all, it helps to understand what Yellowstone actually is, because it is unlike the classic cone-shaped volcanoes most people picture. Yellowstone is a caldera, an enormous volcanic depression tens of miles across, formed when past eruptions emptied a vast underground chamber so completely that the ground above collapsed into the void left behind. Beneath this caldera lies a great system of partly molten rock and intense heat, fed by a deep source of warmth rising from far below the surface. And it is this system that powers the park's famous geysers, hot springs, and mud pots, heating the water that gives Yellowstone its otherworldly features. The very things that make the park a place of beauty and wonder are the surface expressions of the immense volcanic engine below. In the deep past, this system produced eruptions of a scale almost beyond comprehension. Events so large that they belong to a rare category sometimes called super eruptions, capable of ejecting enormous volumes of ash and rock and reshaping the climate for a time. These greatest eruptions occurred a very small number of times, spread across intervals of hundreds of thousands of years, and between and after them, the volcano has also produced many smaller eruptions and lava flows, the last of which filled in parts of the caldera long ago. It is the memory of those rare, colossal events that drives the fascination and the fear, and that defines the worst-case scenario in which distant cities could be threatened by ashfall. Understanding that this is the nature of Yellowstone, a caldera system capable of both frequent small activity and extraordinarily rare great eruptions, is essential to understanding both the reality of the risk and its remoteness, and it sets the stage for looking at the cities that would lie within the reach of the largest and least likely of its possible eruptions. Idaho Falls, the city on the volcanic plain. We begin with one of the closest sizable cities to Yellowstone, Idaho Falls, in eastern Idaho, which sits on a landscape that is itself a product of the same volcanic system in the distant past. Idaho Falls lies to the southwest of the park, on the Snake River Plain, a vast arc of terrain that marks the ancient track of the same deep source of heat that now sits beneath Yellowstone, a trail of old volcanic activity written across the land over millions of years. Its position places it among the nearest population centers to the caldera, close enough that a large eruption would be an immediate and serious threat. For Idaho Falls, the danger of a major eruption would come from its proximity, which would expose it to potentially heavy ashfall, as well as the more immediate effects of a nearby volcanic event. Depending on the winds, the city could receive a substantial burden of ash, thick enough to threaten buildings, disrupt every aspect of daily life, and require evacuation or long-term hardship. Its closeness to the park, which makes it a gateway community and a place shaped by the region's geology, also makes it one of the most exposed of the cities we will consider. Yet it bears repeating that this exposure is a matter of geography and possibility, not of any impending event. Idaho Falls sits today as a thriving city in a beautiful and geologically remarkable region, and its place on this list reflects its position on the map, not any sign that the ground beneath it is stirring toward catastrophe. The surrounding area is also a center of agriculture and of important scientific and industrial activity, and the disruption of a major ashfall would reach beyond the city itself to the farms, facilities, and communities that share the plain. In many ways, Idaho Falls embodies the theme of this entire discussion, a place living in intimate proximity to the volcanic history of the region, built upon ground shaped by ancient eruptions, and yet going about its life in complete safety through the long quiet that is the volcano's normal state. Its story is a reminder that to live near Yellowstone is not to live in constant peril, but to live alongside a geologic wonder whose great events are separated by spans of time almost beyond human imagining. Billings, the largest city in the shadow our second city, is Billings, Montana, the largest city in the state and one of the most significant population centers within reach of Yellowstone's potential ashfall. Billings lies to the north and east of the park, in a direction that places it in a zone that could receive considerable ash in a large eruption, particularly given the tendency of the winds to carry material toward the east. As the biggest city in the region, Billings represents a concentration of people, infrastructure, and economic activity that would make any significant ashfall a major event, affecting a large number of lives at once. The threat to Billings, as with the other cities, would come primarily from ash, which could accumulate on the city and its surroundings, straining buildings, disrupting transportation, fouling the air, and challenging the systems that keep a city running. As a regional hub, Billings serves a wide area, and disruption there would ripple outward across the broader region that depends on it. The city's size and importance make it a key place to consider when thinking about the human impact of a large Yellowstone eruption, because the risk is not only about the raw distance from the caldera, but about how many people and how much of the region's life would be affected. Billings stands as a reminder that the danger of a great eruption is measured not just in geography, but in the density of human life within the reach of the ash, and its inclusion here reflects its role as the largest city standing within that potential shadow. Here is something I would genuinely love to know, and it takes 10 seconds. Have you ever visited Yellowstone, or do you live somewhere in this region? Tell us in the comments, because hearing from people with a real connection to these places makes these videos better, and I read every reply. Okay, back to it. Bozeman, the gateway under the wind, the third city, is Bozeman, Montana, a fast-growing community that sits to the north of Yellowstone and serves as one of the principal gateways to the park. Bozeman's proximity to Yellowstone is part of what defines it, a city whose identity and economy are bound up with the great wild landscape to its south. And that same proximity places it among the cities most exposed to the effects of a large eruption. Its position to the north means that, depending on the winds, it could receive significant ashfall, and its closeness to the caldera would put it near the front of the zone of serious impact. Bozeman has grown rapidly in recent times, its population swelling as more people are drawn to the beauty and opportunity of the region, and this growth means that more people than ever now live in a place that sits close to the volcano. The threat, again, would be primarily from ash, with all the disruption and danger that heavy ashfall brings. From the strain on buildings to the fouling of air and water, to the paralysis of daily life. As a gateway community, Bozeman also serves the many visitors who come to experience Yellowstone, and its role as a hub for tourism and access to the park adds another dimension to the impact that a great eruption would have. Bozeman's place on this list reflects its nearness to the caldera and its position under the winds that could carry the ash, a beautiful and thriving city living in close company with one of the planet's great volcanic systems, though in quiet times, that company is a source of wonder rather than fear. The rapid growth of the city, drawing new residents and businesses to a region prized for its natural splendor, means that the number of people who would be affected by any major eruption has been rising steadily, a fact that makes the calm reality of the volcano's long quiet all the more worth understanding for those making their homes there, for the people of Bozeman, as for all who live near the park. The proximity to Yellowstone is overwhelmingly a gift, a doorway to some of the most extraordinary landscapes in the country, and the remote possibility of a great eruption is a distant shadow that need not darken the pleasure of living in such a place. Salt Lake City, the regional anchor to the south, for our fourth city, we look southward to Salt Lake City, Utah, a major metropolitan area and one of the most important population and economic centers in the entire region. Salt Lake City lies a considerable distance to the south of Yellowstone, farther than the cities we have discussed so far, but its size and importance make it a crucial place to consider, because even a lighter dusting of ash across so large a metropolitan area would affect an enormous number of people and a great deal of vital infrastructure. The exact amount of ash that Salt Lake City would receive in a large eruption would depend heavily on the winds, and its more distant and southerly position might spare it the heaviest burden, but the possibility of meaningful ashfall across such a major city is significant. Salt Lake City anchors a large and growing region, serving as a center of population, commerce, transportation, and government for a wide area, and any disruption there would have effects far beyond the city itself. Ashfall across the metropolitan area could challenge its airport, one of the busiest in the region, disrupt its transportation networks, strain its infrastructure, and affect the health and daily life of its many residents. The city's role as a regional anchor means that its resilience or vulnerability in the face of a great eruption would matter for the entire surrounding area. Salt Lake City's inclusion here reflects not extreme proximity, but the combination of its size, its importance, and its position within the potential reach of Yellowstone's ash. A reminder that the risk from a great eruption is a matter of both distance and the concentration of human life and activity in a place. Quick pause, because this is worth sharing. If you are getting something out of this, tap the like button. It really does help the video reach more curious people. And if you have family or friends who live anywhere in this region, or who love Yellowstone, share this with them, because it is genuinely useful to understand. One like, one share to someone you care about, and let's keep going. Denver, the distant city in the path of the ash. Our fifth and final city carries us farther east, to Denver, Colorado, a major metropolitan area that sits well to the southeast of Yellowstone and that illustrates just how far the reach of a truly great eruption could extend. Denver is far enough from the caldera that it would be spared the immediate, close-range effects of an eruption. But its position in the broad zone downwind and to the east places it within the potential path of ashfall from the very largest eruptions, the kind that spread ash across enormous distances in the geologic past. The ash from Yellowstone's greatest ancient eruptions traveled remarkably far, reaching across much of the continent. And a comparable event today could carry ash toward and beyond a city like Denver. For Denver, the threat would be a more distant and diluted one than for the closer cities, likely a lighter ashfall rather than a crushing burden. But even a modest layer of ash across so large a metropolitan area would be a serious event, affecting air quality, transportation, water, and daily life for a vast population. Denver's inclusion on this list is meant to illustrate the extraordinary reach of a great Yellowstone eruption, the way its effects could extend hundreds of miles to touch cities that most people would never associate with the volcano. It is precisely because Denver is so far away, and yet still potentially within reach of the ash, that it makes such a powerful illustration of the scale of the forces involved. And once again, this is a matter of the geography of a remote possibility, not a forecast, a way of grasping just how large the footprint of the greatest eruptions can be, extending the potential shadow of Yellowstone across a huge swath of the American interior. From the mountains of the northern Rockies out onto the high plains and beyond. All right, I know, second time I am bringing this up, you can roll your eyes at me. But quickly, if you have made it this deep into a video about Yellowstone, you are exactly the kind of person this channel is made for, and a huge number of you who watch have not subscribed yet. That one tap genuinely tips the scales for a small channel like ours. No guilt, just a grateful ask. That is the last time, promise, let's finish. Keeping the risk in its proper perspective, having traced the potential reach of a great eruption from Idaho Falls to Denver, it is essential to bring the whole picture back into proper perspective. Because a discussion like this can easily leave a misleading impression if we are not careful. The scenario we have explored is one of the largest possible eruptions, the rare, cataclysmic kind that has occurred only a handful of times in the deep geologic past, separated by hundreds of thousands of years. Such an eruption is not what scientists expect from Yellowstone in any foreseeable time frame. The far more likely forms of future activity, if any occur at all, would be much smaller events, such as steam explosions or modest lava flows within the park, which would pose little or no threat to distant cities. The great ashfall scenario that would put these 5 cities at risk is a genuine possibility over the immense spans of geologic time, but it is an extraordinarily unlikely one in any human time frame. It is also worth emphasizing just how closely Yellowstone is watched. The volcano is one of the most thoroughly monitored on Earth. Its every tremor, its every shift in the ground, its every change in the behavior of its geysers and hot springs, tracked by a dedicated network of instruments and scientists. A great eruption would not come without warning. Because the movement of the enormous quantities of molten rock required to feed such an event would produce clear and unmistakable signs, likely building over a long period of months or years, rather than striking out of a clear blue sky, giving scientists and communities ample time to recognize what was happening and to prepare a response. The purpose of understanding the risk to these cities is not to live in fear of an event that is almost certainly not coming in our lifetimes, but to appreciate the scale of the natural forces beneath Yellowstone, to understand the geography of a real if remote hazard, and to respect the extraordinary and ancient system that sleeps beneath the park. Knowledge, here, is a source of wonder and calm rather than anxiety, a way of seeing the landscape more clearly and of grasping both the power and the patience of the earth. What this scenario really teaches us when we step back from the specific cities and consider what this whole exploration really teaches, we arrive at something larger than a list of places at risk. We arrive at an appreciation of the deep, slow, immense forces that shape the continent. Forces that operate on timescales so vast that a human lifetime is barely a moment within them. Yellowstone has produced its greatest eruptions across intervals of hundreds of thousands of years, and the quiet that we experience, and that our ancestors experienced, and that our descendants will almost certainly experience, is the normal state of the volcano, punctuated only very rarely by the great events that capture the imagination. To understand the risk to these 5 cities is to understand our place within those enormous spans of time and to see the landscape we inhabit as a living, dynamic thing shaped by powers far older and greater than ourselves. It also teaches us the value of science and monitoring, of the patient, careful work of the researchers who watch over Yellowstone and volcanoes like it, keeping vigil so that if the ground ever does begin to stir in earnest, we will know, and we will have time to respond. The story of the 5 cities is, in the end, not a story of impending doom, but a story of understanding, of the way knowledge transforms a vague and frightening idea into a clear and manageable picture of a real but remote risk. Idaho Falls, Billings, Bozeman, Salt Lake City, and Denver all sit, in their different ways and to their different degrees, within the potential reach of a great Yellowstone eruption. And knowing this helps us appreciate both the extraordinary power beneath the park and the extraordinary rarity of the events that would unleash it. The ground beneath Yellowstone is not a menace poised to strike, but a sleeping giant whose rhythms we are only beginning to understand. And the cities in its potential path are not doomed, but simply neighbors to one of the planet's great wonders, living, as we all do, on the surface of a restless and magnificent Earth. And perhaps that is the truest takeaway of all. The 5 cities we have discussed, from the ones nestled close against the park to the distant metropolis far downwind, are not marked for disaster, but are simply part of the vast and beautiful geography of a volcanic land. A land that has given us hot springs and geysers and some of the most stunning scenery on the continent, precisely because of the fires that sleep below. The same forces that could, in the rarest of scenarios, threaten these cities are the forces that make the region what it is, that draw millions of visitors each year to marvel at the wonders of the park, and that remind us of the deep and patient power of the planet. To know these cities and their place in the story of Yellowstone is to hold 2 truths at once: the reality of a remote but genuine risk, and the reassurance of the volcano's overwhelming quiet, and to see